This is BBC One Scotland. Now here's Laura Goodwin with The Sunday Show.
This morning, Nicola Sturgeon says she was deceived and misled by her estranged husband, Peter Murrell. But this is no longer just a story about one man's criminality. It's about the party machine, its culture, and whether anyone at the top was really looking under the bonnet of that now infamous motorhome. So how does the SNP begin to rebuild trust with its supporters and its donors? I'll be speaking to the First Minister and SNP leader John Swinney. Also on the programme, the Shadow Scotland Secretary Andrew Barry, who wants Westminster to step in with an inquiry into the SNP party finances. And joining us too, former SNP National Executive Committee member Joanna Cherry. I'm Laura Goodwin. Welcome to The Sunday Show. Nicola Sturgeon has sat down with the BBC for the first time since Peter Murrell admitted embezzling SNP funds. The former First Minister says she was deceived, telling Laura Kuenssberg she had no knowledge of and cannot be held responsible for her estranged husband's actions. But while Ms Sturgeon is drawing a clear line between herself and Murrell's crimes, questions are still swirling around the party they once led together. I'm joined now by our political correspondent Andrew Kerr. Andrew, it's been an extraordinary week in politics, and this interview with Nicola Sturgeon is compelling viewing.
Yes, that's right. It is absolutely compelling. And there's a longer version of it as well on BBC Sounds, which people can listen to. We've had, in a way, this week, the three revelations of Nicola Sturgeon. First of all, at the Irish Book Festival on Thursday, we could only read what she had been saying. Secondly, at the Hay Festival on Friday, some pretty tough questions from a former BBC presenter. But now, a long, proper, sustained BBC interview, tough questions there. So a very significant part is Miss Sturgeon's stout denial of any knowledge of Peter Murrell's crimes.
I am deeply sorry this has happened. But Peter went to, as we now know, great lengths to cover his tracks. I'm not going to contribute to that kind of sense that I am responsible for somebody else's crimes. I will take responsibility for the things I do, the decisions I make.
Now, Laura, we said the interview was compelling. There's a lot of emotion running through this. Earlier in the week, the BBC carried the story about Peter Murrell buying a pendant in Shetland for Nicola Sturgeon using stolen funds. Here she speaks about the distress caused by that.
Peter said to me, "I've got a surprise for you. And I saw you admiring this pendant," and gave me it. Sorry. I loved that necklace. And to then find out that these were gifts given to me that he'd bought with the party's money causes a level of, I don't know, pain, bewilderment.
And now to where there has been a consistent focus this week, SNP funds and what was going on in there. Miss Sturgeon in the interview was questioned over claims she quashed some people's concerns about party funds.
Until probably early 2023, there was no suggestion that what was being looked into in terms of the finances was potential embezzlement. The issue that was being looked into was whether the £600,000 that had been raised to fund a second independence referendum had been used for election campaigning. And people were raising concerns in that context. The idea that I tried to stop them is not true.
So there we have it. A lot of the story now remains focused on the party funds and what happened there. We will hear even more about the Peter Murrell case on Tuesday at the High Court in Edinburgh with the narrative, the reading out of the full facts of the case. We'll see what happens there. OK,
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Well, for Scotland's First Minister John Swinney, this is a delicate moment. Is this wrongdoing of a single individual, or does it point to deeper questions about the SNP's culture, governance and financial oversight? Let's speak to him now. John Swinney, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Obviously, this has been a period of reflection for Nicola Sturgeon. I wonder if it is for you too. Did you ever raise concerns that a husband and wife were at the very top of your party?
I didn't raise those concerns, and because I thought the arrangements were well managed by the arrangements that were in place of having a business convener in the party and a National Executive Committee that carried out that accountability. But it's very clear from the experience that we're all having to come to terms with this week that there was a fundamental flaw in those arrangements, and we have to confront that.
Well, let's look back on this timeline a little bit. When did you start to have questions about the finances of the party? We heard Nicola Sturgeon say there that it wasn't until early 2023 that this suggestion of embezzlement was introduced. However, people had been raising questions in 2021 that they weren't getting access to the finances. And in fact, Douglas Chapman, who resigned as SNP National Treasurer, said that he had not received the support of financial information to carry out the fiduciary duties of National Treasurer. We then spoke to you on the Sunday show shortly afterwards, and we asked why did Douglas Chapman resign, and you said that you didn't know why he'd resigned.
Well, that's a statement of the truth, because I didn't know why Douglas Chapman had resigned.
But he told you.
From 2004 till 2024, I was not an office bearer in the Scottish National Party. I was not a member of the National Executive Committee. So I was not privy to any of these discussions that were going on within the internal management of the party. Now, obviously, when I became party leader in 2024, I assumed all of the responsibilities in relation to the leadership and the governance of the party. And what I've done since then is made sure that we have in place the strongest standards of governance to guarantee that all of the ways in which the SNP carries out its business, whether that's about internal debates and decision making, whether that's about policy discussions and manifesto formulation, or whether that's about the governance of the party's finances and its operations, are carried out to the highest standards of transparency and scrutiny. And that will always be the approach that I take in office.
But given that 5 people had resigned, they might not have been saying the word embezzlement, but they were raising concerns about the finances. Is not that a worry that that didn't trigger some greater curiosity within the party about why these people, and I presume people you'd had long-standing relationships with, had these concerns, and should that not have been listened to properly?
I think at the particular time that these concerns were raised was the beginnings, as became clear, of a police investigation into the party's finances. And no party wants to be in a situation where its handling of its finances give rise to any form of scrutiny of that type or any concern of that type, which is very much why I've taken the approach that I've taken since I became First Minister and party leader, of making sure that the governance of the party is operated to the highest standards, that we have transparent information available to the National Executive on a constant basis, that we are setting openly budgets about the forthcoming years and then monitoring our performance against those budgets to make sure that we are using the party members' hard-pressed donations to the best effect in all of our activities.
I appreciate that you are now taking a different path, but what we're trying to understand is what happened. So when you have Joanna Cherry raising questions, when you have Douglas Chapman raising questions, did you ask Peter Murrell what was going on?
Well, what actually happened, we now know, is that there was criminality underway, that Peter Murrell was deceiving people, that he was, as the police statement said in the aftermath of the court guilty plea on Monday, that invoices were being forged, that items were being miscoded, that essentially there was a whole elaborate set of arrangements in place to ensure that Peter was covering his tracks. Now, that is what happened. We now know that there was a criminal act underway, and it took a police investigation to establish that criminality. And of course, I share in the agony that is felt by party members the length and breadth of the country, that we were deceived in that fashion by a very senior official of the party who was carrying out behaviour that was criminal behaviour and completely and utterly at odds, and a betrayal of trust of the interests of the members and of the party. So we know what happened. We know exactly what happened. It was a criminal act that happened.
So what about reparations? Because we have people who feel that they were ostracised from the party for raising their heads above the parapet. And I wonder what message you feel that sends, because, listen, we tell our kids, don't we, if you see something wrong, call it out. Any other organisation, I'm sure you would be encouraging whistleblowers to come forward. But yet in your own party, is there a culture where people feel that they cannot do that? And how are you going to address that?
Well, the culture that I promised the SNP would be an open and participative culture. So if we look, for example, at the formulation of the whole approach of the party to the election campaign, I took that to the party conference in October, a proposal from me as party leader. There were different views within the party. They were all allowed to be heard at the party conference. We had a huge, respectful debate in which different points of view were put forward, and the party's members decided what would be the approach that we would take to the election campaign. Now, what that's about is about making sure we have open democracy within our party. We then have to make sure we've got good governance arrangements in place. So I've set out to you in the course of the interview already some of the measures that I've put in place.
Can I ask you a little bit about the personal element of this? You now lead the party. Have you phoned Douglas Chapman? Have you phoned Joanna Cherry?
I haven't done that, no, because what I've got to do is serve my party, and well, what I've got to do is serve my party and to make sure that I take forward the improvements and the governance that are taking place so that we have the highest standards of governance. We've got good participation in our internal democracy, we've got high standards of governance, and we've got effective mechanisms in place in which people can complain about issues they're concerned about within the party. Those are the arrangements that I've put in place to make sure that we have the highest standards of governance in our party.
But ultimately, did these people not kickstart an investigation into your party which uncovered criminality? Did they not do the party a great favour? Aren't they worth a phone call?
Well, what I'm deeply concerned about, and I grieve for this point for the party members the length and breadth of the country, is that the SNP's trust in one of its most senior figures was betrayed. And as a consequence of that, a police investigation has found out the extent of that betrayal to the highest possible standards conceivable in our country, which has resulted in a High Court prosecution and a guilty plea of criminality by Peter Murrell. And that's come about because of the forensic investigation taken forward by the police, which I think gives us the assurance that these issues have been well examined, well explored, and we know the answers to what happened in this particular case. And the reassurance I give to party members today is that I've got in place now the strongest standards of governance, and we will continue to challenge ourselves to make sure those standards of governance are applied at all times.
OK, so you mentioned trust there, and ultimately, as First Minister of Scotland representing the SNP, you want to ask Scotland the ultimate question of trust at some point, whether Scotland wants to follow you into independence. Why then would you not want to shore up the trust around you and allow an inquiry into exactly what happened in the SNP during this period?
Well, we know exactly what happened. We know there was a criminal act perpetrated by Peter Murrell, and he went to extraordinary lengths, as the police statement said, to cover his tracks and to deceive everyone around about him. So we know what happened, and you can't actually get a standard of investigation any higher in Scotland than a forensic police investigation that results in a successful High Court prosecution and a guilty plea. So we know what happened, and what my challenge is...
We know what happened from a criminal sense, but what about whether, you know, was Peter Murrell a criminal mastermind or actually were things not spotted? And is there any harm in allowing an independent inquiry to look at that? What cost is it to you? It helps you in terms of your leadership, it helps your new MSPs who had nothing to do with it, and it restores party trust. What is there to lose?
Well, the issues of trust, I think, have been explored pretty extensively in the last few years, where there has all of these issues about the issues in relation to the SNP's finances have been well advertised and well communicated in the public media. They have not been a surprise to people that there were some issues that were being aired here. And 3 weeks ago, we had an election in which the SNP came out with 38% of the vote and 58 MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. Now, I think that came about because I openly confronted the issue of trust with the electorate and worked hard to rebuild the relationship of trust between the people of Scotland and the Scottish National Party. Now, every day, I'm thinking about how I can strengthen the relationship of trust between me as the First Minister of Scotland and the people of our country, and it informs all of our actions as I take forward our policy programme to improve the lives of people in Scotland, to get waiting lists down, to make sure that people are able to access expanded childcare, or for first-time buyers to get access to new properties and financial support to do all of that. So I'm constantly working to strengthen the trust between the people of Scotland, their First Minister and their government, and of course with my party. And I will always do that to make sure that people feel well served by the SNP, by John Swinney and the Scottish Government.
OK, First Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Now, letters to committees don't always make headlines, but this one certainly has. The Shadow Scottish Secretary, Andrew Bowie, has asked the Scottish Affairs Committee at Westminster to consider an inquiry into the SNP's finances, which raises a simple question. Is it about shining a light on what went wrong, or is it political manoeuvring? Well, Andrew Bowie joins me now from Aberdeen, so let's ask him. What's this all about? Why is this your fight?
Well, good morning. Well, I wish it wasn't our fight. I think that this is actually a matter for Holyrood, for members of the Scottish Parliament as elected by the Scottish people, in this case only 3 weeks ago. But John Swinney has made absolutely clear that as the Scottish Government, they will block any attempt by an inquiry at Holyrood. So it's incumbent on us at Westminster, Scotland's other Parliament, and the Scottish Affairs Committee, which is made up predominantly of elected members from Scotland, to conduct that inquiry. And that's why I have written to the chairman of that committee to ask that they proceed and actually conduct an inquiry into what went on and when, who knew what and when, and what the governance structures were in Scotland's government, and indeed the third largest party in the UK, over the most part of a decade that this criminality was allowed to be carried out.
You were listening to that interview with Nicola Sturgeon. Do you accept that she was duped by Peter Murrell?
Look, I think anybody listening to that interview would have felt for Nicola and the sense of betrayal that she obviously feels in learning what she's learnt this week. But the fact of the matter remains that she was the leader of a party that had within it a structure that allowed this criminality to go unchecked. We've now got a First Minister who sat as her deputy all of the years that she was First Minister, and even when members of that party were raising questions and feeling they had to resign because we were being put under pressure not to ask questions about the party finances, no questions were raised, and it was buried under the carpet. This is a party that for far too long has had a culture of secrecy and cover-up, from the Salmon files to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow and now the Murrell case. So I think what's right and proper is an inquiry held at either Holyrood or Westminster so we can uncover who knew what and when. And if John Swinney really has nothing to hide, if John Swinney really is trying to regain the trust of the Scottish people and turn a page, then why is he running away from an investigation by his peers at Holyrood or by elected members from Scotland at Westminster? I don't understand it.
But does Westminster really have jurisdiction here? Because the Electoral Commission has said it found no evidence of misuse of SNP policy development funding, and much of the money came from party supporters. So is this something Westminster should be getting involved in?
I think it should. I mean, yes, the SNP were Scotland's largest party over the period of time that we were talking, but they were also the United Kingdom's third largest party, with access to hugely privileged information and briefings at Westminster, and therefore a huge impact on the public life of the entire United Kingdom. So I think it's in the interests of all the British people that a party of such size and importance over that period of time, that such criminality was allowed to carry on unchecked within that party, does face scrutiny from the peers of the First Minister right now in Holyrood or Westminster.
Why don't we extend this to all political parties? Because it wasn't so long ago that the Conservative Party was fined by the Electoral Commission when Boris Johnson redecorated his private residence at some considerable cost. Money he did eventually pay back. But why not kickstart this whole thing, Andrew? Why don't we look at everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think the party would be happy if that was to happen. We've got nothing to hide in terms of our own party finances. It's not the Scottish Conservative Party or the UK Conservative Party that has found itself under police investigation. It's not the Conservative Party that's seen its former chief executive plead guilty to embezzling £400,000 and facing a prison sentence. It's not the Prime Minister or UK or Scottish Party leader that is now facing questions about their spouse being in charge of the party's purse strings and allowing for many years criminality to go unchecked, even though questions were being asked by party members and indeed others outside the party over that course of time. And the way to clear all of this, the way to move on and to turn a new page, as John Swinney says he wants to do, is to hold an inquiry so that we can get everything out in the open. That can take place at Holyrood or it can take place at Westminster.
Okay.
That is the choice of the First Minister.
Right, OK. So if John Swinney did agree to a parliamentary inquiry at Westminster, that would go far enough for you? You would have no further questions?
I mean, then we would let the...
Holyrood, beg your pardon.
Sorry, yes, frankly. The reason that I felt that I needed to write to the chair of the committee at Westminster this week because the First Minister made absolutely plain that he was in no way going to allow an SNP-dominated Scottish Parliament to conduct an inquiry into this matter. So therefore, it falls to Scotland's other Parliament in London at Westminster to conduct this inquiry in its stead. Yeah,
I mean, the Green Party have said that they don't want to have an inquiry at Holyrood. So therefore, how do you progress this?
Well, frankly, we can't. I mean, the SNP's useful idiots in the Green Party will do anything to support their erstwhile coalition partners in the SNP, and so therefore I don't think things are going to progress at Holyrood, hence why I think it has to happen at Westminster. OK. Andrew Berry, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Well, the Sunday show continues through until midday on Radio Scotland. Hopefully you can stay with me because I'll be speaking to Labour's Jackie Baillie to get her take on what she thinks should happen next for the SNP, and we'll bring you the latest on drone strikes in Ukraine. Now, for years, Joanna Cherry was one of the SNP's most prominent internal critics. She was elected to the SNP's ruling National Executive Committee in late 2020, but quit within months, saying she was blocked from improving transparency during the Sturgeon-Murrell era. And she joins us now from Edinburgh. Joanna Cherry, thank you so much for being with us. I imagine you listened closely to Nicola Sturgeon's interview. Did you have sympathy with what she was saying?
Not really. Because I think Nicola was setting up a straw man. She's trying to put in our minds that she's being held guilty for her husband's embezzlement. But what we are actually concerned about is her frustration of legitimate scrutiny of the finances of the party.
But, I mean, she wouldn't be the first woman who's been deceived by her husband, particularly
Certainly
with
not,
financial matters.
But I'm not really interested in their marital relationship. I'm interested in the fact that she was the leader of the party and he was the chief executive of the party. She was his boss, and it was her responsibility as leader of the party to make sure that the National Executive Committee was allowed to do its job properly. And I felt her interview was really quite misleading, as she didn't, she seemed to me to elide the actual timeline of what happened here. You know, what your listeners and viewers need to understand is that back as early as 2019, many SNP members were raising concerns about what had happened to our ring-fenced referendum fund, which appeared to have disappeared from the party's accounts. And I and about a dozen or so other people were elected by the membership to the National Executive Committee and the Finance and Audit Committee to try and get to the bottom of what had happened to that money. Nobody thought there'd been any embezzlement at that stage, but people were worried that the party's finances were being mismanaged. And what people need to understand is Nicola Sturgeon was absolutely at the centre of closing down our concerns. Yes, we were whistleblowers, we were elected to be whistleblowers, and we were frustrated. And we weren't just frustrated, we were absolutely demonised for daring to ask questions. And many people watching this programme this morning will have seen the video of Nicola telling us all that there was nothing wrong with the finances, and that we should be very careful. Those are the words that she used. We should be very careful about asking questions, which many of us found quite threatening at the time. Now, that was filmed at the March 2021 National Executive Committee meeting, and that was her response to an announcement from 3 people on the Finance and Audit Committee that they were resigning because Peter Murrell wouldn't show them the books. Why didn't she investigate at that point? That is the question for her. And the idea that the police investigation prevented her from doing anything in March 2021 is frankly ludicrous. The police investigation didn't start until July 2021.
John Swinney now has to take the party forward. How do you feel that he can do that and put this matter behind him?
The SNP will not progress as a party of government or as the leader of the independence movement until it addresses what went wrong during the Sturgeon years. In my opinion, what's come to light over the last week is the tip of the iceberg of a culture of secrecy and mismanagement. And many people will remember that the late Alex Salmond believed that there had been a conspiracy to remove him from public life, and he thought Mr. Murrell was at the heart of that. Now that we know that Mr. Murrell is a self-confessed fraudster and liar, I think the evidence, which I set out in my recent book, that Murrell was involved in that conspiracy, requires to be looked at. Look, I'm a nationalist and I want to see independence for Scotland. But for me, it's country before party. We cannot have this level of corruption in Scottish public life without looking into what happened and making a firm purpose of amendment to try and sort it out in the future.
There are suggestions in some of the papers today that there might be private prosecutions. We also had Andrew Bowie on speaking about this Westminster inquiry.
I don't think there'll be any private prosecutions. I think that's a total red herring. There needs to be an inquiry, and this was a problem made in Scotland, so the inquiry should be in Scotland. And if John Swinney doesn't have the gumption to set up an independent inquiry, then I fear that Westminster are going to do it over his head. He should have the courage to do that. What has he got to hide?
I asked John Swinney whether he'd called you. He said he hadn't.
No, he hasn't.
Would you welcome a call? Would you welcome some sort of reparation back to the party?
I don't want to make this about me. I've resigned from the SNP because I became ashamed to be a member. If the SNP changed its ways and had a new leader, perhaps somebody of the calibre of Stephen Flynn, I would think about rejoining. But yes, I am owed an apology. I was treated appallingly because of daring to ask legitimate questions. But so were many other people. There are many people who left the SNP as a result of this sort of behaviour under Sturgeon's leadership. And yes, if John Swinney wants to take the movement forward, then he should apologise and welcome us back. But I confidently predict he won't do that. John Swinney is there to sweep Nicola Sturgeon's mess under the carpet. He's got a big brush and dustpan, and that's what he's doing.
Is that fair, though? Is that a fair assessment? I mean, is he not just going to be the fall guy for this? You know, is that fair to really land him with that?
I don't think John Swinney was part of the ineptitude bordering on corruption that led to this happening, but I think he's part of the cover-up. Just as I don't believe John Swinney was part of what was done to Alex Salmond, but he's certainly been part of the cover-up and tried to prevent information from getting into the public domain. So, if you like, he's Nicola Sturgeon's patsy rather than responsible for what happened.
At the heart of this is people who donated money to a party they believed in, hard-earned money. Is there any way that money, you think, can be regained in some way?
I think you're absolutely right, Laura, to highlight, you know, the SNP leadership have tried to prevent, and former leadership are trying to present themselves as the victims of all of this. But the real victims are ordinary, decent, working class people who donated £20 a month or so to the party or to that ring-fenced independence fund, thinking it would be used to further the cause of independence rather than to feather the nest that Peter Murrell shared with Nicola Sturgeon. But you see, I think the issue goes wider than the embezzled money. We still don't know what happened to that independence referendum fund that was supposed to be ring-fenced.
Okay.
That's the sort of thing that I think an inquiry should be looking at. I very much fear that the people who donated to the party have seen the last of their money.
Joanna, I'm so sorry, I have to leave you there. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Just before we go, in last week's programme, we said the cost of Scottish Government special advisors is £2 billion per year. That figure is actually £2 million. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.